kind of dovetail nicely into my my announcement for next week's event. Today we have a wonderful event. Today we have Andy Thompson from the Office of Student Life, and Andy's going to basically tell us about all the things our students are dealing with and some of the things that we can do to kind of help them out, some of the things that the Office of Student Life can do to help them out. So this is a need to know event for a reason. So for those of you who are pursuing certificates from the TLC or even fellow status from the TLC, this is one of the events we really want you to be at, because what Andy's going to talk to us about today is so important. Next week, we're going to have our first teaching chat of the semester. And a teaching chat means that we're going to come here. I'll have some questions and things that I kind of want to pick people's brains about, some things that I'll want to talk about, some things that I think are happening, at that point in the semester. But it's almost kind of like TLC office hours in a way, where people can kind of bring questions and we can kind of crowdsource and talk. If any of you is saying, well, I don't want to chat, it is completely fine for you to sit back and listen. So you do not have to kind of be an active participant and share your voice if you don't want to. Obviously, we would love you to have that opportunity. But if any of you, because someone said those are intimidating, I don't want to come and chat, you can listen to the chat. That is completely, totally fine. If you need to keep those videos off, you need to be doing stuff in the background. In a second, I'm going to mute my video and run and grab my lunch and come right back. And it's only 6 feet away, but I don't want you to see me eat. We get it. So if you want to kind of sit back and learn, that's completely and totally awesome. Having said that, today we have Andy Thompson. I mentioned what he's going to talk to us about is how we follow through on the promise of support. And I've already talked too much. It's Andy's turn. So Andy, we are so excited you're here.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for all of you that are taking time to log in here and watch this chat. I'm always excited to see folks that want to come here and listen, and more importantly, partner in how we're serving our students, how we're trying to ensure our students are finding success, however that they define success. I also want to recognize I'm not an expert in the topic. In terms of some of the things we're going to speak about, there are people on this call that know way more than I do. I'm going to pick on Dr. Colburn. When we reference some of the resources that we connect students to, obviously Dr. Colburn is going to be an expert in her area and what that office does. I think Chris Bowman with the Wellbeing Center, there's gonna be some things that we point to here that you have experts in this room that could even share even more information on. And so we're gonna kind of just touch on it. I've got a presentation here, so I'll be sharing my screen. But as we go through here, if there's questions, like unmute, holler at me. I'll try to pay attention to the chat. I certainly want it to be a discussion. I want us to answer any questions that we've got and utilize the experts that are in this room in terms of how we support our students. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. We'll get going. I just want to try to rework this a little bit so I can see the most I can. Awesome. Well, so yeah, the title of my chat here is how we follow through on the promise of support. And again, I think what's going to be really important is this isn't just the Office of Student Life's job. It's not just one office's job. It's all of our jobs. It's everybody that has taken the time to log into this session today. It's our campus partners. It's our community partners. It's everybody at the table. And so I think as we're having this discussion, I want us to all just keep that in mind, that importance. So on your screen is just the mission of the Office of Student Life, but I like to define our mission as that we're here to help. It is likely in a student's time, whether that's 1 semester or 6 years or 10 years, that life's going to throw something at them that might present some difficulties. And sometimes those things are lower level and easy to resolve. Sometimes it's one big, huge incident that can really impact them across their time. Sometimes it's a series of small things that build up into a huge situation. We like to say we're an office that we want a student to know they can start with us if they don't know where to start, or if they feel like they've been everywhere and they just haven't gotten a solution or just are still getting stuck, they can end with us. And we like to try to be the office that knows resources, that can connect, that can help kind of break down some of those barriers. And in the same context, that also goes for you all as faculty and staff, to call us and ask and brainstorm and to be problem solvers for what's going on with our students. Just some quick facts about the Office of Student Life, and I share this for context. In a given year, we work with anywhere from 3,600 to 3,900 students. The way we count that number, that's not just folks that are calling in for a one-time phone call that we then get going other directions. Those are students that we've done some sort of actionable step with. So whether that's an absence verification or a meeting with a dean, we've done an actionable step with that student. Last year, for context, because our friend COVID, we worked with over 7,200 students. So that was a bit of an uptick in terms of the workflow within the office. I will tell you, we're trending about that same direction this year. Not all because of COVID by any stretch, but just because of primarily absence verification. So I share our student of concern reports, and we're going to go into more depth on what a student of concern is in a little bit, but you can see over the last 5 years there, the upward trend of student of concerns. We identify a student of concern as somebody else puts that student on our radar. So a faculty member fills out our student of concern report, a parent calls in with a concern about their kiddo, a roommate calls in with issues or concerns there. Somebody puts them on our radar and we proactively outreach to that student, okay? Now there's a couple ways you can look at that trend in that upward growth. You can say, wow, there's a lot more issues going on campus. Okay, maybe we could argue that. And there may be a small segment of that has some truth. I also think that a large portion of that is that we've done a better job communicating that process. And so people know that it exists. And I also believe that we've done a better job as a campus community of paying attention to one another, of paying attention to the concerns folks are having, understanding the mental health crisis in our country is real, and that when we've got a concern, we need to proactively reach out to folks. And so I think that's probably a combination of why those numbers have grown. Within the office, I'm director and senior associate dean of students. We also have Laurel Moody and Justin Frederick. We divide our workload in the office by academic college. And so the colleges that I work with, College of Education, Health and Human Sciences, Architecture, Planning and Design, and Vet Med, Laurel and Justin divide their colleges out. So if you call into our office or submit a student of concern, you're likely going to be paired up with the dean that works for that college so that we can work on established relationships with the faculty and the students, understanding those academic programs within those units. This year, we're really excited to announce, and we announced this in the K-State today, Janelle Rieger and Amber Shumway are our two new student life coordinators. For those of you that knew Carolyn Jones, she had been previously in that role for several years. Janelle and Amber have slid into that position. We were able to hire a second coordinator. They're going to be our primary points of contact on absence verification and the student of concern process. The thing to know is if you call our office, you can talk to any one of us. So you don't just have to talk to me. You don't just have to talk to Amber. Like, any one of us can have that conversation. We can look in the file. We can take that report or referral and have those discussions and conversations. Additionally, our office, I always like to share this, part of the student services fee that our students pay go towards an attorney. So Sarah Barr is the student legal services attorney in our office. So if a student is dealing with lower level legal concerns that are not against another student or not involving the university, those are two key points, they can meet with Sarah free of charge. And Sarah can talk through those legal options for a student. Sometimes she goes down to the courthouse. If a student gets an MIP, minor in possession of alcohol, she'll talk through the diversion process that the county might be able to take that student through. Also underneath Sarah's umbrella is our off-campus housing support student. His name is Zach. That student specializes in working with students through off-campus housing. So whether that's roommate issues off campus, leasing issues off campus, our students have that resource here within the Office of Student Life. They just call our main number and they can get connected with Zach or Sarah. So some things I want you to keep in mind today as we're having this discussion. Life's going to happen. It's going to happen for our students. It's going to happen for us as faculty staff. And it usually happens at the worst times, right? Like we don't get a memo that says, hey, in a week, the wheels are going to fall off. In a week, you're not going to be able to go to class because your depression has flared up or because your grandma passes away. or because your father lost his job and now you don't have a funding source. We don't get that information ahead of time most of the time. So what I ask you as folks that work with students on a regular basis is to keep that in mind. Meet the student where they are. Not every student is here to be the 4.0 student. Not every student is here to be the overly involved student. Sometimes a student might be in your class or involved in your area, and they legitimately say, hey, I just need the C because I need the credit, and your class isn't part of my major, it's just part of the general requirement, and I'm gonna dump my energies over here in these classes. That's not something to take offense to. That's the reality of how we manage our time and our energies. And I think that's okay to recognize. Sometimes our students are working 30 hours a week on top of taking your 15 hours of credits. It's okay, and we just have to understand that. Grace and understanding go a long way. I happen to hope that when life hits me in the face a little bit, that whoever I'm working with or for, whatever I'm involved with, have understanding when that occurs. That can say, that's okay, I understand it, how can I help? How can I not add to your stressors? Yes, there's policies. Yes, I get, like, you know, Don was talking before the session here about a big test that was given and only one student missed it. And how oftentimes 5 or 6 miss it. Well, why? Like, what was going on? Was it unfortunate timing? Is there something they're really dealing with? Understanding what our students are dealing with on a daily basis is really important. One of the pros of COVID that I hope we carry forward is that we got such glimpses into each other's personal lives because of this Zoom call, because of understanding folks that had to homeschool their kiddos while they were there, take care of loved ones. And we gave each other a lot of grace and understanding in that moment. And I hope we don't lose that. Students are in more than just your class, for those of you that teach a class. When I'm working with a student and they've missed a few weeks of class or a few days of class, I always say to that student, so if you're in 12 hours, for the next 2 weeks while you're getting caught up, you're in 24 hours because you're doubling up what you've got to catch up on. And so as a professor, I think it's also important to understand that you may lay a plan out for a student, and in that moment, that student says, that's good, it's manageable. Then they talk to professor number 2 and 3 and 4, and now all of a sudden we're still dealing with the same being overwhelmed. And so I think it's, when you can, how do you extend out some time? How do you show some grace? How do you be creative in working with that student? Thinking outside the box. I don't teach in the classroom. I would love to think outside the box with you. Call me up. Like, my favorite phone calls are when I shoot an email off to a faculty member and 2 minutes later they call me and say, Andy, what am I supposed to do? I don't know, but let's talk about the reality of your class and see what we can do. 1, I'm going to learn from that. And 2, maybe we come up with something that's creative that can be used down the road. And the last item is just pay attention. A lot of what we're going to talk about today is just looking at behaviors, is reflecting on what's going on, and just paying attention to one another as human beings on this planet and caring for one another as whole beings, not just this one section. Okay, I know some of you may be thinking this is super idealistic. I don't have a choice but to live a little bit in that world, right? And I think it's okay to live in that world. So before we get started, continue on, I've got a video I want to share, and I'm sure some of you may have seen it. So I'm going to stop my screen share here and slide over to a different screen share. And remember to share my sound, and we'll watch this video.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection.
We don't have your video.
Yeah.
Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant.
One moment. I thought I had selected the right one too. It shows me. Well, then we'll just do
that. Of empathy.
Thanks, Brian.
That's still the slide. Oh, there we go. Okay, thank you.
What about now? Okay, let's try this Let's try this again.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you can climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Okay, I share that video just to give us all kind of a lens and a mindset to work from. I really like the end of that video when it talks about how we respond and the response we can give. And I think what's important, or what I want to challenge us all to remember is we know life's going to be difficult. We know that we all don't have the answers to that, but having our students understand that someone cares and that someone's going to take the time then to help connect students to resources that do hopefully have some helpful tips and some helpful answers. Like, that's the key, right? Is as a student shares something, or as you recognize something going on with the student, is how do we just make it a little bit better for them? And how do we give them that hope and that grace and understanding to move forward? So that's a framework I want you to keep in mind. So how do we recognize a student in crisis? As I talked about, a lot of this is paying attention, right? I'm not going to read through this entire list, but I think take a look at it and review it. And what I would say is, how are you building on your established relationships or your ability to recognize a person in need to then make that referral? One thing at the bottom there, and I totally stole this from Carolyn, our previous coordinator, that not all crises are loud. Not every crisis jumps out right in front of you and says, hey, I've got an issue or a concern, right? Oftentimes they can be small, they can be under the radar, and it's understanding some of those adjustments. So let's talk about the disheveled appearance, right? So if you have a student that's showing up regularly and they kind of dress a certain way and carry themselves a certain way. And I'm not talking about that freshman year beard that they grow, but are they now not showering? Like, are they not taking care of themselves? Like, have they completely, the poor hygiene, have they just kind of stopped caring? Like, those are moments where you want to maybe engage in a conversation to say, hey, what's going on? the inability to concentrate, the worrying, or the isolating, irritability, all of these things, missed assignments. So some of you may teach really large sections. If you have a 200-person section, like I don't expect you to have a personal relationship with all 200 of them. Like that's tricky to do. But you know what? Your grade book can tell you a lot. If you take attendance and they were coming and then all of a sudden they're not there for 3 days, or they were an A student and all of a sudden now they're just this consistently poor performing, and it's not just because the material got harder, that can tell a little bit of a story, right? And that can tell a story about maybe it's time to just shoot them an email and say, hey, can I check in with you and see what they have to say? Like if it was your friend, if it was your sibling, your child, your partner, and you would be engaging with them and you wouldn't let them leave the room with that worry, then that's probably the time to engage with that student in some way, shape, or form, or get them over to us so that we can help engage with that student. So how do we assist a student that's in crisis, that's showcasing some of those things that were on the previous slide? Again, building upon your established relationship. I think if you give a darn about a student or a coworker or whoever in your life, and they know that you care about them, you genuinely ask them how you're doing, you engage with them, you're vulnerable yourself to an appropriate level, that goes a really long way for our students' responsiveness when they're in a moment of need. Relate your observations, normalize, right? I think everyone on this call could probably raise their hand and say at points in their life, and maybe while they're in college, moments that they struggled, moments where it kind of got out of hand, moments where they needed that assistance. And I think normalizing that A, these things happen, and B, it's good and appropriate to utilize your resources. That's why they're there. I think that helps get us to the point we need to get in terms of supporting our campus community. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in the referral process a little bit later. Make your referrals, whether that's to your academic dean's offices, the student's advisor, Office of Student Life. Know your resources on campus, whether that's CAPS, the Family Center, Lafine. Does the student live in housing and dining? If they're saying, hey, I'm having housing issues, have you talked to your RA? Right? Like I think just being knowledgeable of what's out there goes a long way to helping our students. And I think really importantly, take care of yourself. If you're a person that cares about students and cares about engaging in this work, it can get draining, right? Like that empathetic approach and being there for folks that are having off moments can get really difficult. So how are you, if that's going for a run, if that's you yourself utilizing resources in the community on campus, like we've got to take care of ourselves if we're going to take care of others. And so be mindful of that as well. So student of concern process, we've touched on this a little bit. The Office of Student Life, our phone number is answered 24/7, 365. There's a dean on call that same time period. So if you ever need anything and it's a crisis, you can call us and they know our protocol and they can get you in touch with one of us. Obviously, if it's a health and safety, call the police. That's always your first phone call. But you can fill out that student of concern reporting form. Let me tell you what happens when you fill that out. You have the opportunity to select if it's a low concern, an intermediate concern, or a high concern. If you check high concern, both coordinators, all 3 deans in student life, and Dr. Lane as dean of students get an email notification with that concern. Now, obviously, if it's 3 in the morning, we're probably not checking that. But the reason we do that is so that one of us is making sure we're getting our eyeballs put on that so we can ensure, like, if there's a health and safety issue there, whether for that student or others, you have marked it as high. So clearly there's some validity to that report. We want to make sure that we're responding correctly. Low and intermediate go to our coordinators and then the dean on call as well. And we're going to do an email outreach to that student. If we don't hear back from them a day or 2 later, we're going to do a phone call. And we're going to try to reach back to you as reporters to say, hey, here's what we've done. If you have updates, let us know. Obviously, health and safety, we're going to look at that. That's our first and foremost primary concern. So sometimes a wellness check is needed. If a student lives in housing and you're saying, I have concerns about their mental health and well-being and they may be a harm, we're going to call either housing or campus police or local police to go knock on that door. We are going to lean on the level of safety, the level of engaging in a way that helps ensure we're reaching out to our students and keeping them safe, as opposed to the other way around. We're a campus that tries to do that. And of course, then we're going to try to meet with students within that situation. So we're looking at every report, we're kind of taking it through our processes, and we're going to try to communicate back to you as a reporting party. That's just an example of the form. We've made some adjustments this year on our form based on some feedback we got last year. We're trying not to use the phrase reporting form. We got to change that on our website still. Making it more of a referral, right? Like you're referring a student for services, for support. They're not in trouble if they're submitted as a student of concern. You can go to our website. We have a student of concern guide where we have some tips and tricks on issues that you may be facing, offices you can connect to. For any of our new faculty and staff, for the last 2 years, in the coming weeks, you'll get a postcard mailed to you that's going to have this website, and it's red, and you can hang it on your bulletin board so you can really quickly notice, like, oh yeah, student of concern process, you've got it. That's going out to all new faculty and staff for the last 2 years. Let me click on my chat here, just make sure I may be missing some stuff. I'll check the chat in a little bit. Absence notification. So this has been a new experience for our office. So last year, the university passed the excused absence policy. Now, with us being hybrid and online, with COVID being very dominant, this policy did not necessarily kind of show up for us a lot outside of the COVID experience. I'm sharing with you today because I think it's important. The Office of Student Life actually only has a handful of categories that we get to excuse officially. And you can see them there: military service, court appearances, pregnancy, childbirth, adoption, disability accommodations are actually through Student Access Center, religious observance, COVID-19. We then have another section called verified absences, where these are the ones where, like, technically illness, technically a funeral, things of this nature are not excused absences, but we will work with a student, collect that documentation, verify it, and then we'll email out to faculty to say, hey, this student's come in, we have the documentation, and we can verify that for these 5 days or 3 days or 2 days, this student was needing to be absent. We also handle some of those kind of just extenuating things that don't have a piece of paper that goes with it, because we know life comes up sometimes, like, I don't know, my grandma fell down and I'm the closest family member and I had to get home to help get her up. There's no paperwork that goes with that, right? But we're gonna work with the student, trust that, and send that letter out. What we really aren't designed to do, and we've got to work on getting this out to faculty, those one-off things. So a student decides, hey, I've got a wedding that I'm traveling for on Friday. We've gotten like 5 or 6 of those sent to us by faculty members, and it puts the student in a weird spot because we're not verifying that. That's not an excused absence. A student's choosing to miss class for that, right? A student wasn't feeling well but didn't go to the doctor. Like that's not something we can work with. A student had a dentist appointment and they just didn't want to reschedule. Like sometimes students just miss class and like they have to make that choice. And as a faculty member, you have the flexibility to decide if you're going to work with a student in that moment or not. And so you can see on the screen, as of 2 days ago, we had 903 absence verifications submitted to our office already this year. That's a pretty hefty load. And so we're trying to work on the messaging to help understand what really sits in excused absence and verified absence, and what is still very much professor discretion and student choice. Okay, I would love to brainstorm with some of my faculty colleagues on how that's playing out in your daily life, maybe in another meeting or another setting, or maybe, Don, that's a faculty senate discussion for us to have down the road, but something for all of us to consider. Just as a reminder, because COVID-19 is still going on, we support students through that process. That is an excused absence as stated by the provost. Quarantine versus isolation, I'm sure everyone on this call that teaches a class has gotten one of those. We're still doing those this year, still following the guidance from Lafine, still following medical documentation and following the 10-day or 14-day isolation period, depending on circumstances, trusting contact tracing and all of that for close contacts and vaccination status and all that good stuff. And so if you have questions on that, check out the COVID website. You know, we continue to do updates there. It's still in our community. I think we're still managing that process in a pretty good way as the university. Reporting mechanisms. So in these is really talking around sexual violence, dating, domestic violence, stalking, discrimination. If you have a student come to you and share information regarding any of those topics or issues, you don't get to keep that to yourself. You do have to share that up. The Office of Institutional Equity takes the reports for discrimination, sexual harassment, sexual violence, stalking, dating, domestic violence. If a student comes to you and says, I have something I need to share with you, and it was a really bad situation, and I just need to tell somebody, you should pause and inform them of your role and point them into the direction of some of the confidential resources. And so Dr. Colburn and the care office, like that's where we're going to want to send students to do that. CAPS. We want our students to be in control of their story. And that's a really important element. Now, if a student says, yes, I'm ready to report, I want the resources, I want to do this, they certainly can tell you, but you've got to tell Office of Institutional Equity. But just be mindful of that. You can also send a student to us in the Office of Student Life, but even for me, when a student sits down, I'm initially going to pause and inform them, hey, if you want to have some control on this, let's get you across the hallway to the care office. Let's get you to the offices where you have that control. The care office can speak to what the process looks like for reporting, whether that's to the institution or to the police, what a protection order might look like, what it looks like for additional support for funding, for mental health support. So I think it's just really important to understand the intricacies of that process. Well, there we go. See, I jumped ahead on my slide there. So there's the care office, super important. Location number. You can email them, call them. They're an unbelievable resource. And I would say that whether Dr. Colburn was on the call or not. So some additional resources to be mindful of. Academic Achievement Center. If you have a student who is struggling with time management, struggling with how to take tests, how to just kind of do some of those basic life functioning things, they can get an academic coach, and that coach can work with them on skill building. So how do we take this thing that's a concern or an issue or a struggle, develop it so that it's no longer that, so it becomes a strength or at least a more manageable topic. Academic Achievement Center is located in Holton Hall. I can't shout them out enough. I probably refer a student down there every single day because a lot of the times it's just they've never had to work on that skill. So let's get them that skill build. Student Access Center, I think you're all very aware, but because Dr. Maceberg Tomlinson presented last week. But again, if you have students with temporary or permanent disabilities who may need an accommodation, let's get them hooked up with Student Access Center, again, located in Holton Hall. Lafine Health Center, full health center, physical therapy, medication, women's clinic. CAPS is located in the health center. And again, CAPS used to be known as Counseling Services. Now it's Counseling and Psychological Services. There's a new coordinated care model to where a student can go in, they'll be seen more quickly, meet with a therapist, assess what's really going on for them, and then they're going to decide is individualized therapy the right approach and who's the right therapist? Or maybe there's some group therapy that makes sense for that person. Maybe there's some other placements that make more sense for that student. I think an unbelievable adjustment done by that area to better serve our students and their needs. Chris and Dr. Miller are on the call here, so they could really talk more about this, but the Bandana Project, Project Waypoint, these are initiatives that have come out of the JED initiative, which is our campus-wide initiative for student mental health support. Bandana Project is specifically designed for students, but faculty and staff can also go through it. You may see students walking around with a green bandana, and the point of that project is to educate our students on resources, so a student can see that bandana or can speak to a student in need and say, hey, here's where you can go, both at a campus level at a regional level to get that support. Project Waypoint is a more intensive training specifically designed for faculty and staff to ask a series of questions around mental health and suicide ideation to get an idea of where a student really lands in terms of the level of crises they're in the mental health field. Again, resources, where can we get that student to? How can we engage proactively to help someone and avoid some seriously self-harming behavior or suicide ideation behavior. So those are things that I would highly recommend to go through that training. You can reach out to the Wellbeing Center in the Lafine Health Center, and they're a great partner that I would highly recommend. Financial assistance. College is expensive. There's so much going on for our students. And we no longer live in a world where a student can work 10 hours a week and pay for college. We haven't been there for a long time. And so when a student has a financial crisis, that can greatly impact them. It's not just as simple as picking up a few extra hours at work, because now you're making $70 extra a week, right? For 10 hours of work. Like, that doesn't work. So if a student's having financial issues, let's get them over to us. Let's get them to PowerCat financial aid. Sometimes there are opportunities for a student that they're just not aware of. The K-State Proud Award, you know, students helping students, where a student can fill out for one-time monies that maybe something's come up that's keeping them from being able to attend classes, so we can get them over that hurdle and focus academically. If a student says they're struggling financially, just get them into our shop or into one of the financial shops. There you go. So CAPS we touched on. They also have drug and other alcohol, or alcohol and other drug, there we go, services. So a student that might be experiencing troubles with that, they've got some folks over there that specialize in that work. Cat's Cupboard, I think lots of us know about, but no questions asked, food pantry, located in Fairchild Hall. For students having food insecurities, they can get over there, they can get food so that they can have a full stomach and they can focus. Something that's really exciting is Cat's Cupboard just got a grant. It was where they can actually have refrigerated food now. And there's a great partnership with the Morris Family Multicultural Center, where a student can go to the Cat's Cupboard in Fairchild and they can go over and actually get fresh fruits and veggies out of the refrigerated section. And so I think that area continues to expand. It continues to be a need for our students, and just doing some unbelievable work. We know if a student is facing food insecurity, it's likely they're facing other concerns or issues, whether that's financial in nature. If you're hungry, if you can't pay your bills, how are you expected to fully focus academically and do well? It's a very challenging situation to address. And so if we know they're having those concerns, it's likely you should try to get connected with other resources, Student Life, or other folks on campus to help address those and help them know they're supported to move through with that. This is obviously not an exhaustive list. Like, I look at folks that are on this call and I could add your areas to it. I'll specifically look at Kevin on my screen and our non-trad and veterans area, which name change, our Veterans Center in the Union is becoming the Military Affiliated Resource Center. Because that area focuses on serving our student veterans, but our National Guard, families, anyone that's connected to our military. So we're changing that name. So if you start hearing the MARC being referred to, that mirrors what's happened at Polytech and kind of mirrors what's happened nationally to be more inclusive of what's actually going on in that area. Good, Kevin popped on, give me head nods. So
well played, Andy. Thank you for the push.
Okay. So what can you do? And it's just a recap, right? Remember, life happens. What can we do? Help our students with grace. Meet them where they are. Think outside the box. Pay attention. Just care for one another as people in our community and on this campus. I say to students all the time, my first level of care for you is you as a person. And ideally, that also means you're a student here, and that you're being a successful student here. Sometimes that means we're adjusting that in the time being. Sometimes that means we're not being a student for a short time while you work on whatever's going on. But ideally, if we treat someone right, they're going to come back to us. They're going to speak to their positive experience, but more importantly, they're going to be a happier, healthier person. So when I see them on the street 10 years down the road, ideally they're a K-State grad, but more importantly, they're the best version of who they can be and making a more positive impact and not having to experience those challenges continually down the road. We're in 201 Holton Hall. That's our website. And I'm going to stop my screen share, and I am happy to take any questions or have whatever discussion we would like to have. And in the meantime, I will kind of side read the chat, see if there's anything in there that I missed.
So Andy, thank you so much for all of those amazing resources. I want to remind the people watching that this will be something that you can look at later. So it's possible now that these are resources you don't necessarily have to tap into, but maybe 2 weeks from now you will. This will be available for you at our TLC website. Andy, the question that I kind of have is, what can I say to my class tomorrow to help? So there are a lot of these resources and a lot of things that our campus provides, but what can I tell my class tomorrow to help them?
Yeah, that's a great question, Don. I mean, I think for me, what it leans back into is just letting your students know that 1, you care, 2, that it's okay to not be okay, and 3, that there are folks here that want to help you find success, however that needs to be defined for you. And then I think what it is you can say that, but then how do you show up in that moment and on a daily moment and let them know that that's a genuine piece, right? So you can say, hey, I'm here for you, come tell me stuff. But then when a student comes and tells you, if you don't respond super positively, that's not going to land super well, right? And so I think, or if you're not a person that wants to hear it, I know that's not you, but if you're not a person that wants to deal with that or hear that, to say, okay, I got it, but now I'm gonna share it on to folks that can help, that can be more intentional in that outreach and in that piece. But I think it's just, we've got to get that message out to our students that there are folks that want to help out, and it's okay to not be okay. But they've got to take those steps to engage in getting okay again.
Thank you, Andy. I appreciate that.
Ryan, your video came on. Did you have a question, or you just wanted to be able to see?
I just felt like, I needed to look at something besides me in my suit. So I was here.
Oh, okay. All right.
I did want to mention, and this is a good plug for next week, Andy, if you want to plug what's going on for CERT, for bigger level events. I think you can probably do that, but
yeah. Yeah, something that I didn't cover in this presentation, so I'll throw it out there. Obviously, there are behavioral issues that can occur on campus. We touched on the kind of the discrimination, harassment, sexual violence piece, but there is a code of conduct for the university. So if you have genuine behavioral concerns, you can report that. Ryan is the chair of the university threat management team. So for if there's a faculty and staff non-student issue, I'm the chair of the team for student concerns. So next week, actually, from 1 to 3 on Wednesday, Ryan and I are doing a training on our threat management policy. So if you have interest in what that policy is and how we apply it and in the process we go through, you're welcome to attend. If you are someone that could be called to serve on a threat management team or a critical incident response team, so if you're a department head, if you're I'm going to pick on Kevin again, because Kevin might be called to serve, as someone that's connected to our military connected community. You're invited to come to that training. We want you to. There's limited seats. You can sign up through HRIS. I got on today. It's at the bottom. Threat management training. It's 2 hours. It's going to be interactive. We're going to do a case study of a case and actually walk through what a case looks like and how we apply that. So there's a shout out to, if you want to hear me and Ryan put on our show next week for that, you're welcome to attend. And to know that it exists. If you've got a threatening student or a code issue, ksu.edu/report. You can report discrimination, threatening behavior, code of conduct, academic concern, or honor and integrity concerns, student of concern. I think there's maybe 8 reports on that page you can fill out.
Youth protection concerns.
Yep, yep,
And either Andy or I get all of those reports.
that's right.
So Cheryl in the chat said that one of the things we can do is you can make our students aware of services and provide links to our students. I want to highlight and it's likely many of you know this, but there are some syllabus statements that you should consider including on your syllabi that would help with this. One is a mandatory syllabus statement on mutual respect and inclusion in K-State teaching and learning spaces. And it kind of talks about our students' need for safety and belonging in the class. There's another that's optional, and I'm not sure it should be optional, but it's an optional statement on mental health. And what it does, it actually does provide a number of the resources that Andy has talked about today. And one of the things that I really like these things being on our syllabus is if they're on our syllabus, our students know where they are, and it gives us occasion to talk about them periodically. So I think that these are ways that we can do this, not only with what we say, but also in the practices. And Andy's kind of talking about that need for what we say and what we think to actually map onto the practices with which we teach. Putting those things on our syllabus and talking to our students about them, I think, is key.
Yeah, Don, I can't echo that enough. I think it just comes down to normalizing and letting students know. And I think a simple syllabus statement, I think a syllabus, yeah, so probably a lot of students don't read them, right? But to take the time to put it there shows the student that you took the time to put it there. And that it's important enough to put it there and take up that paper space or that online space. So in the moment of need, they know at least one professor and one spot that they can turn and take a look at that. So I totally agree with that.
So Andy, given your experience, where are we falling short?
We are not a perfect campus. Right? Like no one on this call would say we are. I wouldn't think. I think that we struggle as a campus community, as many campuses do, with just that, the full understanding that our students are dealing with a lot in the total picture of the concerns they're dealing with. That's why I touch on so much they're not just in your class. There's a lot going on for our students, and I think campus-wide we could be better about always understanding that piece. Granted, there are rules in a class, there are structure we've got to have to kind of move through situations. I understand that. There are lab classes out there that you only set the lab up one time. Like, I get that. Like, I'm not missing that fact. But I just think campus-wide, we could do better about fully understanding the care and concern we should have one another. We're better than where we were, and I think we're going in a really positive direction. I think the JET initiatives, the Morrison Family Center for Student Wellbeing, there's a new position there, a new Associate Vice President, Kathleen Hatch, who's going to come in and do some great work with well-being. We've got tons of academic partners that are doing some great work with us and as a campus community. I just think we can always do better in paying attention to one another, caring for one another, and getting us connected so we're as healthy as we can be. There's probably a lot of other things we could nitpick on that we could do better, and I'm not going to open those cans of worm. But there's certainly some things that we could also pick out. I want to see what Melissa wrote in the chat here. Yeah, to get the counseling services number as a contact. Yeah. The other thing that I would recommend, and I need to add this to the presentation, is the Guardian app. So that's, through the police department. If you don't have the Guardian app on your phone, it's a great resource that does a couple things. One, it's got all sorts of resources in it that, whether that's student life or care or the police or you name it, with their numbers. Another thing that it has, though, is a really easy reporting mechanism. So if a student's out and about on campus and sees something a little fishy, they can take a picture of it and it gets sent to whether that's facilities or the police or whatever. It's the Rave Guardian app, if you're looking for it, Rave Guardian.
I
There's
just put the
actually,
link.
oh, thanks, Ryan. There's actually a really cool feature in there where if you're walking through campus, so we've got Wildcat Walk that a student can call and have a security guard come walk with them places. We also, in that Rave app, if I'm on campus, I could send Ryan a link and say, hey, will you watch me on my walk? And Ryan would get a connection GPS and watch me walk through campus, and I can end that connection whenever I get to where I'm going. I mean, I could do it to my mom in Illinois. She could watch my walk. It works not just on campus. So if a student's at spring break and they want to do something with the walk feature. So it's a safety tool that I think we've got to get to our students' hands a little bit more regularly, because it's a really great connection. There's a feature on there where you can actually connect to dispatch and chat with dispatch if you're in a moment of need. So that's, again, I think there's just resources for days out there for students, but I think how do we get it to our students in a way that they pay attention to it, use it, or at least know where that list is for when they need it in that moment. Thanks for that comment, Melissa. I think that's a good, just a good reminder of using their phone. They never know when they're going to need it, but to know that it's there when they do need it. Any other questions, comments? I really do appreciate you all coming for this chat today.
So to broaden it out and to ask a question of the audience and not just of Andy, what are your students dealing with now that maybe you'd want to share, unload, get some insights on?
So
I think, oh, sorry.
you can go ahead.
I'm teaching online this semester, a graduate class. And one thing that I've seen a lot of is because they're literally all over the country, one in Canada, is being aware of what's going on nationally. Like we had students that are affected by the hurricanes in Texas. And so we want to give them grace for that type of stuff too, especially if you're in that online environment. It just kind of, you obviously can't be watching everything every time. But if you see an issue or they bring up an issue, then either A, believe them, or B, do a little homework to make sure that's what's going on, but just being aware of, because we have so many online or distance students.
For me, I'm seeing a lot of students struggling with their mental health a lot more than usual. I think that the pandemic and having to stay at home and the fear of illness in themselves and in their family members has really affected them. And then the transition back into pseudo normalcy that's not really normalcy, and the uncertainty of whether that's going to stick around has really affected them. And it's a hard time for them and for all of us, really. I also wanted to point out that there are a couple of responses and questions in the chat that I wasn't sure if people were seeing.
Yeah, I do want to, Melissa commented on, or question about texting or chatting capabilities with Student Life. That's something we're wanting. We're wanting to look into that. So we don't currently have that option. We will text a student on a student concern outreach. We will text them now that says, hey, we sent you a letter, would love to have you open it, connect. So they will get that text in that regard, but it's not a live chat back and forth.
Hey, Andy, there's something that I wanted to add with our student groups that we've been talking to.
Yes.
It kind of goes off what Tiffany just said. Talking with some of our students, it's really interesting just to kind of, like I said, pile onto it, that students are finding the transition from online and virtual back to in-person very difficult. But the statement a couple of students have said to me that I found, eye-opening is they've said, we feel like we can't say anything because this is what we've wanted for so long. We're just going to look like we're complaining, and maybe we're going back, or we're advocating for it to go back to virtual. And so having those conversations and letting people know, you can want something, and it doesn't, you don't have to not bring it up and talk to somebody, whether that's us, whether that's other peer groups, things of that nature. But that is a real worry that I've heard from several students. They want to be back in person and we're here and it's difficult. And now they feel like they can't say anything to anybody because they're worried about what the future holds. And they don't want to see us as kind of hypocrites, for a lack of a better word.
Chris, I'm glad you brought that up. I literally, right before this presentation, was in a meeting discussing that with Thomas and Nick and some other folks about what can we do as a campus to help students know that it's okay to struggle with this transition back, and also what are the resources to help with that piece? Because I completely agree. We're seeing some more elevated behaviors right now that we're having to address, some that are policy violations and some that are just kind of not great, that we're, educational conversations. And I think it's the transition to being back around people all the time again, and in the stress that comes with sitting in a classroom environment, all these things. And so I think that's a discussion that we all need to be having as a campus community. And Ryan, I echo what you said there. Like, I think we're all kind of adjusting to life back. It's weird. For me anyway, I'm bummed that this wasn't in person because I like that engagement, but there's also kind of a comfort to the Zoom right now, which is probably broken. That's probably broken me. But I hear that from other folks too, that it's just like, okay, natural, we can just kind of be in our little space we've gotten accustomed to. So yeah, I think that's a discussion we need to be having, and how are we having it with our students? And again, letting them know that's okay. You're not a hypocrite. Like, it's okay to desire something and then go, wait a second, this wasn't quite what I had hoped. But how do we make that better for our students and our faculty and staff? Yeah, I don't have the answer to that.
So there's a comment in the chat about students being nervous about in-person exams. And one of the things I actually said in the Principal's College teaching class yesterday is, I may never give another in-person exam again for the rest of my career. I'm not sure what the point is now that we've and 2 years ago, I would have told you a very different story, but I'm not really sure what the point of in-person exams is anymore. We just had, I mentioned this at the beginning of the thing when we were chatting, is we had over 200 people take a Gen Psych exam online in a 3-day window, and all but one person took it, and that person hasn't done any coursework. So I don't think that person is really in my course. And the mean was about where it would be if I gave that exam in person based on prior experience. And I let them use all their resources, take it when they want, where they want, all of those kind of things. I'm not sure that we can't do a better job about removing stressors and removing barriers proactively. I don't think that there are the ways that we've traditionally assessed or the ways that we have to assess. And I think kind of, that empathy that Andy was talking about is something you may have heard me talk about before too, is I think we can be more empathetic and make this a more reasonable experience for all of us. Even the small thing, by having that exam be online, my TA and I did not have to spend 75 minutes in a really hot, crowded room staring at people to make sure they don't cheat. And that means that we got lots of time back to do other things that are more fulfilling for both of us. So I think that we really do have an opportunity here, and superstars like Andy Thompson on our campus and many of the rest of you who really kind of back the students' behalf and the students' well-being. I think we're moving toward a much better education here at K-State. So I really want to thank Andy for sharing this with him. And I think that all of us with some creativity and some empathy can do wonderful things for our students and for ourselves. I think it's a theme that we heard Andy talk about today, and I'll reiterate it here too, is we do have to take care of ourselves in this experience. So we are about out of time. Maybe Andy can stick around for 30 more seconds in case anyone has anything else. I do want to remind people that next week we will have our teaching chat. This is kind of an open discussion, and if you want to come and listen, that is completely, totally fine. I won't put you on the spot, but I'll definitely have some things that I want to crowdsource in there. So please stick around if you have more questions for Andy, but otherwise, thank you so much for coming today. We really enjoy this, and this has been recorded. We will post that if you need any of these resources moving forward.
Thank you, Andy. You're super awesome.